Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and today I'm going to work on going through my recommended changes for the Daemons of Khorne. For those of you that have watched my series videos in the past, you're going to have heard a lot of these recommended changes because a lot of them have not been enacted, because I have a suspicion Slytherin doesn't really want to rework on this faction because they're planning on releasing the Black Legion this winter, and they don't want to probably have the Daemons of Khorne competing against that faction. But the fact that people spent some decent money buying this faction and they're not well optimized, they're kind of a one-trick pony, I think they owe it to the player base to make some minor changes here. And so I'll give my 2 cents on what I would recommend. I'm going to give multiple recommendations through this series. Sometimes people who are new to the channel are like, oh my god, how can you recommend all these things for this faction? If Slytherin were to enact everything, it'll totally break the total faction with their balancing. And I do think there's some truth to that criticism, so that's why I want to address it in these videos. I'm just giving several suggestions on potential changes here. I don't expect that, or am I necessarily am I recommending that every one of these changes happen, but I think these are things that may work to, if they enact some of them, to make it more dynamic play. Because what I really like to see is for every unit to pretty much have be a good enough unit that it'll be used in the multiplayer matches, because currently that is not the case, and I would like that because it leads to more versatility with the matches. Because if you know what your opponent's going to be doing and using the same kind of builds over and over again, that's just going to lead to boring gameplay, and then it just burns out the player base, and then people leave the game, which is fine as people, you know, get used to things and want to move on to other games. But I think if you create a very dynamic play style, then that encourages people to stick around and also leads to more life of the game itself. Especially if Slytherin wants to continue to sell other factions for this game, you need to have everything be viable to increase the player base's interest here, because I think they really left a bad taste in people's mouths. I know they certainly did with me with these Daemons of Khorne playthrough, because they then did that unlimited swarm. Like when you bought this DLC, not only did you get access to the Daemons of Khorne, but I think you also got access to like that unlimited chaos battle, but they would only, you know, call in 5 or 6 different units, and then you'd be like, okay, so I'm going to fight the same 5 or 6 different units for unlimited turns here. That doesn't seem very enjoyable. And like, well, we'll make some changes to it in the future, and they just totally abandoned it. So just overall, I think this was just a pretty negative experience for the player base, and it certainly was for me, so I can only speak for myself. If you guys disagree with the recommended changes that I'm going to give here, please comment below in the video. I like to have everything just in one spot. Originally, when I had released this kind of series, I had it with multiple factions all together, but people would ask me specifically what my thoughts are on a specific faction, and then they get a little bit annoyed when I'd refer them to the series and be like, I don't want to jump around in your videos, I just want it to be specifically on a faction. So I said, okay. After getting several of those comments, I said, I'll just remake it. And as I've been going through my unit guide recommendation videos and adding some time codes that kind of jog my memory on each one of these units, because I got to see them through a skirmish match and their empowered abilities, and so that kind of made me be like, all right, I'll finally go back and remake this with my thoughts, since some of these units have been changed since I had made original videos here. So going through this here, if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. And the first unit I would like to see changed is the Bloodmaster. Now, I think this is going to be a pretty hot take, but what I would like to see is for their Locus of Khorne here, their ability to be within 3 tiles instead of 2. That way you can have the Bloodmaster still taking cover, because you need to use these guys as the backbone of your force to keep using your demonic rituals to summon more units. And because you have, you know, a 3-turn cooldown, 2-turn charge time, which I think is reasonable, unless you're going to be playing unlimited turn match. Most people are going to be playing an 8 to 10 turn match. That means you're probably going to be able to summon in 2 to 3 times on the match, so you'll never use your full ammunition. And then because most of your guys are extremely vulnerable to flamers, if you increase this range to give them a little more armor penetration and increase their damage and the armor, I think all that would increase the viability of the demons, because right now they're, as being a one-trick pony, they're just very easy to kill unless you're in a map where they can just out-summon you. So it's actually kind of ironic that the demons will actually play better if you play a lower requisition or command point game, because then they can really use their demonic rituals to overwhelm your forces. But if it's on a larger requisition force, that won't matter as much, because you'll be able to kill enough of their units, because you can just know what they're going to use and overwhelm them here. And then by the other change I'd recommend is, because you're going to be buffing up this Locust of Khorne, what I would do is I'd make the demonic ritual so it could no longer spawn in Bloodmasters. And I think that's what's going to piss people off. But I don't like the thought that you can spawn in additional spawning units. That just starts to get way too overpowered on certain matchups. Now, yes, I agree, because you don't have a lot of versatility, you need to have just an overwhelming swarm of units to even have any chance of winning. But by being able to summon in additional summoners, it just doesn't feel good. I don't feel strongly about this, so you guys telling me to go pound sand and everybody's like, that's a stupid freaking idea, then, you know, I'll recant it. But I do think that you need to buff up the Locust of the Khorne. Now, it doesn't stack, so even if you have things overlapping itself, it shouldn't matter, because otherwise if you start stacking this with that increased range, that would be way too overpowered. But I think if you made those two changes, I think the Bloodmaster would be much better. The unit that I would like to see change the most is the Bloodthirster, and what I would like to see here is I'd like to see him lose his ability to do demonic rituals, because, you know, he's a Bloodthirster, damn it. He's like an avatar of Khorne. You should be out there, you should be killing everybody, he should be out there trying to get skulls, and then if he dies, he dies. But by having him be like, well, we're going to kind of hide him in the back, let him summon once, then we'll jump him into combat, and then when he gets injured, we're going to turn around and put him in the corner, and then he can summon in some more units. It's just like, that seems so antithetical to what a Bloodthirster should be. So just take away his ability to do the demonic ritual, and that way he'll be in combat here to help you use the greater demon to get you momentum gains. You know, you use your insensate rage to attack, but in exchange for him losing the demonic ritual, what I would like to see is for him not to suffer an accuracy penalty when he uses the dreadful wings, because effectively, in exchange for him losing the ability to have more than one way of using him, you need him to be able to land attacks and kill as many units as possible for you to get your 300 points. So I would just take away that 20% accuracy penalty and have him lose that demonic ritual. Now, the other thing I would do is, what happens is when you attack the Bloodthirster in melee combat, is Slytherin has made the decision that you counter-attacking with your Great Axe of Khorne doing 105 to 140 damage is too overpowered, so they give him this little hokey-pokey kick thing, and that only hits for 40 damage. So ideally what I'd like to see is, if you attack the freaking Bloodthirster in melee combat, he hits back with the Great Axe of Khorne, and they just remove that stupid dumbass kick ability that he has for his counter. But if they're going to keep it coded that way, what I would like to see is that that does more damage, because the fact that a unit that's, you know, what is this, probably 40-50 feet tall, sits there and stomps on you and does, you know, 40 damage, that seems absolutely ridiculous, especially when units like the Canonists hit back at full power with their Blessed Blade. You definitely got to make this guy be, you need to be scared to fight this guy in melee. I mean, he should feel completely overwhelming and overpowering, and that is not the case. I mean, there's plenty of times when I sit there and just tank hits from this guy knowing he's gonna do that stupid ass donkey kick, and it just does not feel like a freaking Bloodthirster should. So I think that definitely should be changed. Now, maybe you can make an argument that maybe you just cut the accuracy penalty to 10 from 20%, because you may be too powerful otherwise, but 20% is too much. I mean, no other jump pack unit that's attacking in melee suffers a 20% accuracy penalty. And I mean, this is the Bloodthirster, man. He's supposed to be the ultimate killer in melee combat. Like, make him feel overpowering and overwhelming. There's nothing worse than jumping into a bunch of units, and unless you have their rear exposed, to sit there and have him try to attack a tank or something like that, and he has a 70% chance to hit, and he whiffs the attack. It's like, what the fuck? So make that change, please, please, please. That would be my recommended thoughts for the Bloodthirster here. The Demon Prince, this is another unit that I think needs to have some changes. I mean, overall, his basic kit is actually pretty good, but what I would like to see is that they specify that Might over Magic lasts for 2 turns, so I wish they would give you an idea. They just need to say expires in 2 turns, because a lot of players think that only lasts for 1 turn, and then they don't want to use this ability. And this is actually an amazing ability to help you buff your units, so please just clarify that in the description that it lasts for 2 turns. And I would argue that they should do that for every ability that lasts more than 1 turn. They need to say expires, because since they have some abilities, especially on units that they've reworked, that now specifies that it expires in 2 turns, what that leads to is players, especially newer players that are already going to be overwhelmed with this game because of all the different factions, all the different units. They see, oh, it doesn't say expires in 2 turns, so they're going to think it defaults to expiring in 1 turn, and then they're never going to want to sacrifice one of their AP from the Demon Prince, which has this amazing Hellforged sword attack, to buff his other units, whereas it makes perfect sense for you to do that, especially if you're going to be jumping in with the Bloodthirster and start attacking with this Great Axe of Khorne. So please clarify that. And then I think everything else here is very reasonable, but the other thing I would like to see changed is the Demonic Axe. Now, you guys have heard me talk about this so much, you're probably rolling your eyes, but my god, why the hell would somebody spend 40 requisition to get a Demonic Axe that does, 15 additional base damage and 20 at the maximum end, getting 2 armor piercing, and lose the potential to do any splash damage? It's idiotic. So either you need to really ramp up the base damage here, which would be one option, and I still think you should reduce the cost. It shouldn't be 40. I mean, you've just totally reworked how the Adeptus Sororitas weapon loadouts have been dramatically reduced. The Astra Militarum weapon loadouts have been reduced. You need to really reduce this cost, because I mean, your freaking Bloodletter squad here costs 60, so you're telling me 2/3 that axe is the equivalent to 2/3 of a Bloodletter squad? That's freaking stupid, man. So either, if you're going to keep it at a really high cost, you need to really increase that base damage to make you want to do that, or you just need to give them back a bunch of splash damage. So honestly, I think if you gave them, ×2 splash with, similar splash damage here, so then you feel like, okay, now I really am hitting for a high amount. Because what you'll frequently find when you're building out different armies is it's not uncommon for you to have somewhere between 30 and 50 requisition left, and then you can't afford any of your other units because they're more than that. So one of the options to do this is you effectively give your players this really good weapon that they may actually want to equip to, close out that gap, and then by giving them a good ability, a good weapon to do that, that would make for a much more enjoyable experience. So please make some changes to the Demonic Axe. Either dramatically reduce the requisition, but even if you do, you need to slightly increase the base damage, and you need to give it some splash damage, because otherwise the Hellforged sword is just so much better, because you can kill so many different infantry with it. Because effectively with this Demonic Axe, he'll just sit there and keep attacking. If he gets surrounded by a bunch of like knobs, he'll kill 1 knob per attack, and it's like he won't be able to escape. He's now locked in there for the rest of the combat. So it just doesn't make any sense. So for all those reasons, the Demonic Axe needs to be changed, because this is just a stupid freaking decision that they ended up doing there, and it just pisses me off. As you can tell, I'm getting angry just thinking about it. It's just, oh god. And so to continue to grow the size of my aneurysm here, I'm going to talk about the next unit that they're just completely fucked up, and this is the Soul Grinder here. I get what they were doing here. They're like, we got to finally give them something that is a ranged unit, so they give you this Harvester Cannon, and this is actually a very good ranged weapon. It has no splash damage, so effectively it's meant to be an anti-vehicle, anti-hero weapon, which is fine, no issues there, but you're paying 250 points for this guy, and he's a Soul Grinder of Khorne. So he should be wanting to be getting into melee anyways. So you need to give him a viable melee option. And in fact, you're trying to do that because you give him the Iron Claw, which is actually a pretty decent melee attack. And it's a free action every 3 turns. But because your primary weapon is meant to be a ranged fight, you're not going to be using your free action. And then if you want to try to use your free action to get into melee, then you're using your Warp Claw, and this thing sucks ass. It's like you need to increase the base damage, you need to increase the splash. You know, you got to make a Soul Grinder feel like it's worth 250 points, and you got to make him a freaking beast. So you guys gotta buff his melee ability here. It just feels bad. So increase the base damage, increase the splash, and then between that increased splash and then the ability to use the Iron Claw, I think people would actually start to use the Soul Grinders again, because now you have a unit that's going to be really good in range if you need the range. And then if they're bringing a mass infantry, mass melee build, well, by all means, you're a Soul Grinder of Khorne. Let's start chewing some shit up in melee, and then you can sit there and attack them with your Warp Claw and then use your Iron Claw every 3 turns for additional damage. So that's my recommendation here. I mean, I get what they're going for, but they have such conflicting dynamics for this unit. It's like it excels at range, it sucks at melee, except when you use the Iron Claw. But because if you use the Iron Claw and this, it's not uncommon for you can't even squad wipe a medium tier infantry unit. It's just a disaster. So please buff up the Warp Claw. I mean, at least make it almost as good as your Iron Claw here, because that thing just runs that free attack runs circles around the Warp Claw. So make it better, please. That's my thought there. Now, continuing on with these thoughts here, the next unit I'm pretty disappointed in is the Bloodcrusher. So these guys don't feel great. They're like if you were going to talk about a unit that's incredibly average, it would be these guys. The thought process for them, which I get, is like, okay, they have 6 armor, so they're kind of tanky. They get to do a charge attack, so you can close a lot of distance. You can then lock guys down into melee. You know, fine, I get all that. But the problem is it doesn't quite excel at anything unless you can get it to have rear attacks, okay? So I think there's several potential ways that you could fix this. And let me know what your guys' thoughts are here, because maybe I'm just being overly negative on the Daemons of Khorne, but I just find that most people, including myself, don't like them. They don't get much play because they're just not dynamic enough. And even with these changes, they're still not particularly dynamic, but it'll at least make each of the units a little more competitive, so at least you'll be able to make slightly different army variations out of these 8 units here. So the first option is you give the Hellblade some splash damage. Okay, that might be the easiest thing for you to code for. Now they're going to say, oh my gosh, you know, we can't just change that because now we're going to we'll have to change the coding for the Hellblade. So I get it. They have the same weapon, so it's the equivalent of 3 blood letters here attacking. But again, I feel like with them being on, I don't know what this term of these guys are, demon bull rhino things, they should get some splash damage. So I think if you added splash damage, that would all of a sudden make these guys start to feel a little bit better. Okay, there's another option that you could do, and I doubt you'd want to do this because it would actually take some effort, would be to give these guys a free action where their mounts would get a free attack like every 2 or 3 turns, because then that would help you do additional damage and make these guys feel a little bit better. Because right now, unless you're fighting an enemy hero or a vehicle, which these guys can actually do decent damage against, but if it's any sort of mass infantry squad, these guys just can't kill them because they don't have enough damage output. So it just feels really bad, because effectively they're going to be doing 15 to 20 damage to 3 different models. So you know, you have some guardmen here, it's going to take several turns for these guys to start killing guardmen squads. It's just stupid. Okay, the third option is you increase their devastating charge ability damage. Now you have to be careful with this because these guys do only cost 90 points, so if you increase it too high, then it's going to make these guys a little bit too overpowered. but with their final damage only being 22 to 30, that means it's taking you 3 charge attacks to squad wipe anything other than the lightest tier of infantry. So it's going to be 2 charge attacks to squad wipe Acadian, Guardman squad, or Gretchen. So that means you're spending 180 points worth of units to kill a unit that may be worth 30 to 50 requisition. And then if you want to, you know, charge in there and kill a Seraphim squad or a Seraphim squad, something like that, now you're having to use 3 units to do that, and you're likely going to be charging through your own unit doing damage to yourself. So now you're spending 270 points to do 90 points worth of damage, or maybe 100. And then with your charge attack, you're going to be triggering reaction fires, Overwatch, all those things, and that's going to increase the chance of these guys getting killed. So then the following turn, they're still not going to do a lot of damage. So again, increase the base damage to your Hellblade so they do more damage. Give them some splash damage. Give them a new animation where your mount gets to attack, or increase your devastating charge. I think all those things would be potential solutions to make these guys better. And then my only other thought is, since these guys are effectively just bloodletters that are on the Bloodcrusher here, I would like to see them get access to the Murderous Tide ability. I think they should count towards the Murderous Tide, and then they should give you that option to get the plus 10% critical hit chance, because that can stack up to 4 times. It can be hard for you to want to stack up 4 bloodletters, or yeah, I guess it would be 4 bloodletters to get the maximum amount of stacks, because then they're just going to get flamed down. Whereas if you could add Bloodcrushers into your Murderous Tide combination, then these guys can tank flame hits, and then you can leave them next to your bloodletters, and you can still be getting some increased damage, because really you got to get that stack of Murderous Tide going up, in addition to getting your Locus of Khorne. So I think if you were to add that ability to the Bloodcrushers, that would also really help increase some dynamic play and make these guys be more viable. So let me know what your guys' thoughts are on this. Certainly you can't do all those things, because that would just make these guys way too good. But those are my 4 potential solutions to making these guys feel much better, and also to increase their damage output, and just to be you know, just more dynamic unit here, because where they're at now just does not feel good. I'm pretty happy with the Fleshhounds here, and I'm pretty happy with the Bloodletters as well. My only other thought is you increase the stacks of Murderous Tide, but I think that would quickly get out of control, especially if you're going to do some of these other changes on these units here. So if you're going to make other changes, then I think keeping it at 4 stacks is fine. If you're not going to make any other changes, I would not mind seeing the Murderous Tide go up to maybe even 60%. That way you can just make these guys' damage go incredibly high, and that would increase a aggressive Bloodletter build. And therefore, because you need to have high damage output, because you don't have great ranged units, and all these guys have low armor, making them super easy to kill with anybody that has a flamer. So I think you need to do something to increase their damage, because the demons do not feel bad once you get them into combat and you have some of these stacks, and these guys can do some amazing damage. The problem is again, to get that, you need to have them all grouped together. They're in melee. Chances are the units you're going to want to have these guys attack are going to be vehicles, which means they're going to explode in these guys' face. They don't have much for health. They don't have much for armor, so that explosion may be enough to almost squad wipe most of these guys. Now the explosion, I think, does actually cap off, so it doesn't always hit every model in the squad, but it just is a bad combination here. So I would just recommend changing that potentially, unless you're going to do some of these other changes, in which case that's going to be too overpowered. And then the final thing that I would like to see changed is the fact, the basic faction trait actually for the Daemons of Khorne. So that Blood for the Blood God, I mean, I totally get what they're going for. Currently what it does is give you 25% momentum gain for killing organics. The problem with that, though, is if you're playing Astra Militarum, you're playing against, you know, the whole Necron force, you know, anybody that's going to be bringing mechanized forces, or the Necrons themselves are counted as inorganic, that means you've effectively nullified their entire faction trait. And it's actually kind of difficult for the demons to reliably get to surge other than your Bloodthirster or your Demon Prince. The rest of these guys get killed so quickly they never get their momentum up, and then the other part of your faction trait is the more momentum you get, the more damage they get, but because they're never getting that momentum very high because they're just immediately being killed by flamers, you just can't get them to their full potential. So I think what I would like to see is that instead of it be 25% bonus momentum for killing organics, I would like to see it be, you know, bonus momentum for melee kills because you're fighting with Khorne. And then if you want to add something with organics to get them even further, then you say like +1 momentum per kill of an organic or something like that. I think making some changes to the faction trait that way would be a much more viable option. The other thought I had, but I doubt they would ever do this, is one of the things that their other game called Sanctus Reach did very well is when you had a Demon of Khorne in melee combat and he killed a unit in melee, they would actually partially heal, so they had like a life steal for when they were killing units, and that was kind of a fun mechanic. Now I think that'd be too complicated to create in a game like this, but that would be another option. Or, you know, if you kill a unit, you get a 30% chance to spawn in another one of your Bloodthirsters back or something like that. But again, that would totally change the coding of the game. They would never do something like that, but adding some sort of mechanic like that could be fun too, just so they have a little bit of more uniqueness. You know, and again, they seem to like to add free units, and again, I'm very thankful for that. I'm not trying to throw shade at all, but please, I found that with the units you're adding for free, they're not necessarily units that are adding a lot to the faction, so you're not like filling in holes with these free units. So it's like what the demons need, you could give them like Chaos Furies. That way they have something that is still consistently melee, but now is even easier to lock guys down into melee to let the rest of your guys get there. You know, add some sort of unit that's going to add things. You don't really need the demon cannons because you already have the skull cannon here. You know, I'd like to see the skull cannon retain its splash damage when it's on Overwatch, kind of like a basic artillery piece. I think that would be another change that I'd like to see for this faction here. I don't like that Overwatchers don't have their splash damage. But with that, those are my thoughts for changes for the Daemons of Khorne. I think I brought a lot of negativity with this video, so I apologize for that if it came off overly critical, but I definitely am very frustrated with what they did with the Daemons of Khorne here, and I feel like they kind of know it's a little bit of a disaster, and they've kind of thrown their hands up in the air and kind of abandoned this faction. So I'd really like to see it have a little bit of a rework, or at least make some of these balance changes here, because I think it would make it a much more viable option. Because, you know, I think with a little bit of changes like that, I think every one of these units would then be viable, and it would lead to, so then you'd never know what kind of matchup you're going to have. Now, clearly, if you did every one of those changes that I recommended for the Bloodletters and the Murderous Tide, then people are just going to swarm Bloodletters. So again, I understand I'm not recommending that they make every one of these changes, but these are just some examples of what I thought to maybe make things be a little more enjoyable and add versatility and viability to every one of the units. So with that, I'm going to sign off for the day. I hope you're enjoying these videos. If you think my opinion sucks on these matchups here, or not these matchups, but these recommendations, you have other ideas for recommendations, comment below. I'm always interested to see what you have to say for these kind of videos, because I'm always interested on what other players' perceptions of these things are. But if you are enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.